Today, we're breaking down the most disturbing animal attacks in shallow water, from a Hawaiian tide pool hiding something inches below the surface, to a Florida sand flat where one careless step changed everything. But first, the crystal waters of the Bahamas, where a groom bent down in 3 feet of water and never stood back up. It was July 14, 2016, on Great Guana Cay, in the Abaco Islands of the Bahamas. The late morning tide moved slowly across a narrow sandbar, clear water sliding through a shallow trough before flattening into glass. A single charter boat idled offshore while the beach remained mostly empty under steady sun. Kellen Mouton, 31, supervised a floor shift at a regional distribution warehouse outside Baton Rouge. He was steady and rarely impulsive. He and his wife, Maris, 28, a dental hygienist, had saved for 2 years for this trip. It was their first time leaving the continental United States. They chose Great Guana Cay for its quiet, ferry access, no large resorts, long stretches of beach without crowds. They rented a small cottage within walking distance of the shore and planned simple days. Swim, snorkel, and spend long hours on the sandbar away from crowds. Late that morning, the beach was nearly empty. The sandbar extended offshore, mid-shin near the shoreline, and gradually deepening toward the outer edge where a shallow trough cut through at roughly 3 feet at mid-tide. About 80 yards offshore, a local charter boat drifted on anchor. The operator cleaned bait at intervals, rinsing fish and discarding scraps overboard. A light tidal flow moved alongshore toward the bar, carrying diluted scent in that direction. Bull sharks are documented entering warm coastal shallows and using troughs along sandbars to move with minimal depth. A 6 to 8 foot bull shark can accelerate in short bursts and strike once before veering away. In shallow water, heavy bleeding disperses quickly and is difficult to control without a tourniquet placed high and tight. Around 10:40 a.m., Maris waded onto the sandbar while Kellen followed a few steps behind. As she shifted her footing, a small personal item slipped from her hand and fell into the water, settling on the sand near the edge of the trough. She stepped back toward shore while Kellen moved into the slightly deeper channel to retrieve it. He bent down and picked it up. At roughly the same time, the charter boat engine started briefly as the operator adjusted position. The prop wash scattered a loose school of mullet near the trough's edge. The surface rippled, then gradually settled as Kellen turned back toward shore. The shark entered through the trough at the sandbar's outer edge, where the depth was approximately 30 inches, enough for full body clearance. It struck from behind and slightly to his right. The impact twisted him sideways and knocked the small device from his hand, sending it into the sand several feet away as the water around him erupted. The bite was a single, forceful bite high on his right thigh. The shark released immediately and moved off through the trough. The wound opened at once, torn muscle with heavy bleeding. Blood streamed into the clear water around his legs. Kellen remained upright briefly, then attempted to step toward shore. He made 2 uneven steps before dropping to one knee. His hands went to the wound. The injury was located in the upper inner thigh, where the femoral vessels run close to the surface, making uncontrolled bleeding likely without immediate compression. Maris ran into the water and pulled at his arm, moving him toward shallower ground. The water around them darkened. Within roughly a minute, his movements slowed. He collapsed forward, partially submerged. Maris and the charter operator, who had already begun moving toward shore after seeing the commotion, dragged him onto wet sand near the waterline. The operator carried no trauma kit for arterial hemorrhage. They applied direct pressure with towels and clothing, but the material saturated quickly. No tourniquet was available on scene. Kellen stopped responding within minutes. His breathing became irregular and then ceased. The shark did not return, which is consistent with documented single-strike incidents in shallow coastal water. The charter operator radioed for help immediately after observing the bleeding and hearing Maris call out. A response boat launched from Marsh Harbor. Given the distance and marine response time, arrival was approximately 25 to 30 minutes after the initial call. By the time emergency personnel reached the beach, Kellen had no detectable pulse. Resuscitation efforts were attempted briefly and then discontinued. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner determined he died from rapid blood loss after a shark bite severed major vessels in his upper thigh. Circulatory collapse occurred within minutes. No other injuries contributed, and toxicology was clear. Authorities secured the scene, collected personal belongings, and interviewed witnesses who had been nearby on the beach and boat. Physical evidence was logged, and officials released only a brief summary of their findings. Regional outlets carried short reports in the days that followed. Maris returned to Louisiana within days. Co-workers organized a collection to assist with funeral expenses. There were no lawsuits. The sandbar remained open, a stretch of shallow water where less than 3 feet had been enough for a single fatal strike. On a quiet sandbar in the Bahamas, clear water concealed a sudden fatal strike. Months earlier on Hawaii's Big Island, Another calm shoreline would end with a young fitness model standing ankle-deep over a lava crevice where a giant moray eel reacted in seconds and left rescuers racing against time. It was March 3, 2015, at the Kapoho Tide Pools on the eastern edge of Hawaii's Big Island. The afternoon was windless, the Pacific lying flat beyond a maze of black lava shelves that trapped ankle-deep basins of clear, sunlit water. The rocks were sharp, uneven, and slick with algae just beneath the surface. Seren Nakagawa was 26, living in a studio apartment in Honolulu, and working the front desk at a physical therapy clinic 4 days a week. She posted fitness clips and meal photos to a modest but steady audience of about 4,000 followers. A small supplement company had offered her $180 for a product shoot at Kapoho, barefoot, natural light, protein bottle in hand. She had been there twice before and knew the lava was sharp. She mentioned bringing water shoes. The photographer, Dren Fujita, said barefoot would look cleaner in the frame. Seren was not reckless. She had grown up swimming at Ala Moana and hiking wet ridgelines. She was careful with footing, careful with angles, careful with posture. The shoot was simple: 2 hours, a few different pools, then lunch in Pahoa. She wanted brighter content for her feed and a stronger relationship with the brand. Nothing about it felt extreme. Kapoho's tide pools were a patchwork of jagged basalt shelves and narrow crevices that connected to the open ocean through submerged channels. Most pools ranged from 6 inches to about 2 feet deep. The rock was uneven and often coated in a thin film of algae that felt like soap under bare skin. Giant moray eels lived in these cracks. They did not roam in open water and did not hunt people. They stayed in holes and reacted when stepped on, cornered, or fed. A large adult could reach 5 feet long, thick as a forearm, with backward curving teeth designed to hold fish in place once bitten. There were no posted warnings specific to eels, but locals often advised wearing footwear and watching for gaps in the rock. Seren had heard that before. When they moved to a fourth pool closer to the ocean edge, Dren positioned her on what appeared to be a flat shelf just beneath the surface. The water there was about 14 inches deep at its center, and he remained a few yards away on dry lava while she adjusted her footing. Seren shifted her weight for a better angle, placing more pressure on her right foot. That foot slid slightly into a narrow crack in the shelf. The movement pinned something inside. The eel reacted instantly. It lunged from the crevice and clamped onto her right ankle just above the heel. She recoiled sharply at the waist, drawing in a sudden breath as pain hit. When she jerked her leg back, the eel's backward curving teeth tore through skin and muscle. The water clouded with dark streaks as she struggled to pull free. The eel twisted once against the rock, a short lateral whip that deepened the lacerations. The primary damage came from the teeth and the force of her movement against the rough basalt edge. She lost balance almost immediately. Her left foot slipped on algae, and she fell forward with significant force. Her forehead struck the submerged basalt edge with a sharp, audible impact that caused immediate disorientation. The blow was forceful enough to produce a brief loss of consciousness, later documented by the medical examiner as a moderate concussion with cerebral stunning. As her weight shifted forward, the eel released and withdrew into its crevice. Seren's face submerged in roughly 14 inches of water, her nose and mouth pressed against the algae-slicked rock surface at an awkward angle that partially obstructed her airway. Her arms flexed once in a weak, uncoordinated attempt to push up, but the combination of neurological disruption from the head impact and the disorienting pain from her ankle prevented effective movement. Water entered her airway during an involuntary gasp reflex triggered by the pain and shock. Within seconds, her body went still. The aspiration of water, combined with the concussive effect of the head strike, caused rapid respiratory compromise. She remained face down, unresponsive, as blood from her ankle continued to spread through the pool. Dren later told investigators he hesitated. Witnesses in nearby pools stated he stood at the edge for several seconds before stepping into the water. An estimated 15 to 20 seconds passed before he reached her, critical seconds during which water continued to enter her compromised airway. By then, Seren's movements had ceased entirely. Blood from her ankle spread through the pool, consistent with deep lacerations rather than a major arterial injury. When he lifted her shoulders, she was pale and unresponsive. Her right ankle showed multiple deep puncture wounds and torn tissue, with steady bleeding, but no evidence of catastrophic vessel transection. He dragged her onto dry rock and called 911 at approximately 1:51 p.m. 2 snorkelers in a neighboring pool heard shouting and ran over. The woman began chest compressions while Dren attempted rescue breathing. Dispatch records confirm response time of 23 minutes from call to arrival due to narrow residential access roads. The fire department paramedics continued CPR and transported her toward the hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as drowning following a fall with moderate traumatic brain injury and lower limb trauma. The moray eel bite to the ankle was documented as the precipitating injury that led to loss of balance. The lacerations measured several inches with soft tissue damage, but no major vessel severed. A forehead contusion with underlying subdural hematoma and evidence of concussive force was consistent with high-impact collision against basalt. Water was present in the lungs, with frothy fluid in the airway consistent with aspiration during impaired consciousness. The tide pool was closed temporarily while officers photographed the scene and identified the crevice where the eel had been disturbed. The animal was not removed. Morays are native to the area, and defensive bites are consistent with being stepped on. A short local article described the incident as an accidental drowning after a marine animal bite. The photo shoot ended that day. Her social media remained online, her last post uploaded the afternoon before. The tide pools reopened quietly. The rock shelf appeared unchanged. Dark basalt, clear water, and a narrow submerged crack where the eel had been pinned. From a barefoot content shoot in ankle-deep Hawaiian tide pools that turned fatal after one misplaced step, we moved to the northern shoreline of Waiheke Island, where a seasoned charity swimmer nearing Surfdale Beach would be met in waist-deep water by a bronze whaler riding the same baitfish push toward shore. It was February 21st, 2015, off the northern shoreline of Waiheke Island in New Zealand's Hauraki Gulf. By late morning, the tide had eased into the shallows at Surfdale Beach, where families stood ankle-deep along the sand. The water was calm, clear enough to see the pale bottom beneath gentle surface ripples. Orla Vance, 38, was a primary school physical education teacher from Devonport. She had competed in regional open water events in her 20s and continued structured training before work along Auckland's North Shore. The crossing to Waiheke was a charity swim supporting a Decile 2 school's aquatic program where her sister taught. The fundraising page reflected modest local donations. Orla arranged a kayak escort and a small aluminum support boat crewed by 2 friends, consistent with informal long-distance swims in the Gulf. Colleagues described her as disciplined and cautious. She had postponed earlier attempts when winds shifted and did not swim without escort. The approach to Surfdale was selected because the sandy shelf allowed a controlled finish on foot. The support boat was instructed to remain outside the inner shallows to avoid grounding. Weather that morning was stable, with light wind and moderate visibility. The near-shore zone off Surfdale slopes gradually from deeper water to waist and thigh depth, over firm sand with scattered weed beds. Bronze whaler sharks, commonly called copper sharks in New Zealand, are documented in the Hauraki Gulf during late summer and are known to enter shallow coastal water when following schools of kahawai. They can reach 8 to 10 feet in length and are capable of rapid acceleration in surf zones, typically striking once and releasing. Kahawai were active along the shelf that morning under tidal movement. By 11:20 a.m., Orla had been in the water for more than 5 hours. Her stroke had shortened, but remained steady. The kayaker, Brix Ahern, stayed 3 to 4 yards off her left shoulder. The support boat idled about 60 yards behind in deeper water. Roughly 30 people waited along the shoreline, watching her final approach. Approximately 380 yards from the beach, the water was between chest and upper waist depth, based on later measurement of the tidal stage. Kahawai were visible near the surface. Brix later reported that he observed baitfish tightening and breaking direction quickly. Orla continued swimming toward the shoreline marker. The first strike occurred from below and slightly behind. Witnesses described a sudden disturbance and Orla's body jolting laterally. The bite was to the right upper thigh, high along the inner aspect rather than directly at the hip, consistent with limb-targeting behavior documented in coastal shark incidents. The shark released immediately. Orla resurfaced and attempted to kick forward. Her right leg failed to generate propulsion. Blood spread rapidly in the surrounding water. Brix turned his kayak toward her and reported seeing extensive tissue damage with heavy bleeding. The injury location corresponded to the femoral region, where major vessels run close to the surface. Orla attempted brief forward movement before her body rotated upright. Within seconds, the shark reappeared. The second contact was another single bite lower on the same leg, with no rolling behavior observed. Bronze whalers are not known for sustained death roll actions. The motion described by witnesses was a sharp lateral surge and release. Orla's head submerged. Brix reached her within seconds and grasped her under the arms. The depth at that position was later determined to be between waist and thigh deep, allowing partial footing but unstable support. He attempted to lift her onto the kayak bow but nearly destabilized the vessel. The support boat advanced to the edge of safe depth and cut its engine. One crew member entered the water to assist. They moved Orla toward shallower water and applied direct pressure high on her thigh. Witnesses described heavy, rhythmic bleeding consistent with an arterial injury. A bystander called emergency services at approximately 11:26 a.m. Paramedics arrived 9 minutes after dispatch and began advanced life support on the sand. Orla did not regain consciousness and was pronounced dead at 11:44 a.m. The coroner listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to traumatic laceration of the femoral artery and associated vessels caused by shark bite. Drowning was noted as contributory following submersion during catastrophic blood loss. Police interviewed multiple beachgoers who witnessed the incident. Their accounts described a sudden strike, a brief resurfacing, a second bite, and collapse within minutes. Marine authorities closed the beach for 24 hours and conducted precautionary patrols. No shark was pursued, consistent with local protocol in isolated baitfish-associated encounters. The fundraiser was closed within days, and the collected funds were transferred to the intended school program at the family's request. National coverage lasted a single news cycle before fading. Bricks suspended open water training for the remainder of the season. The shoreline reopened the following week. Baitfish continued moving along the sand shelf with the tide. Officials later reiterated that bronze whalers regularly enter near-shore waters during seasonal runs, even in areas used for recreation. The finish banner was removed. The sand shelf remained the same, gradual, shallow, and just deep enough for a predator to follow prey to the edge. She lost her footing in water shallow enough to stand in, and 2 summers later, under a different shoreline and a falling tide in far north Queensland, a veteran dive operator would pause at a ladder above dark current, while something far older waited beneath the jetty at Kuya Beach. It was August 9th, 2017, at Kuya Beach in far north Queensland. The evening tide pressed dark water against the timber pylons of a private jetty, the latter disappearing into 4 to 5 feet of murky flow. A narrow, scoured pocket beside the outer posts held slightly deeper water as the current slowed under a moonlit sky. Idris Tamboli, 44, ran a small independent dive outfit out of Mossman. He worked from a used aluminum boat and booked clients by phone, charging less than larger reef operators. He had logged thousands of dives along the outer reef and coastal shelves. Other divers described him as methodical. He replaced frayed straps before they failed. He did not rush entries or exits. That night was not commercial. It was a personal dive with Ren Solano, 38, a Marine Parks Ranger who often joined him off-duty. They had used that dock before. They knew saltwater crocodiles were present in the region, and public reporting had documented recent sightings along nearby creeks and mangrove edges, but they had not encountered one at that jetty. The dive lasted just under an hour along a shallow reef edge that dropped from 12 feet to nearly 30. They carried standard gear, aluminum tanks, buoyancy control devices, and short safety tethers clipped during ladder exits in current. Idris clipped his tether out of habit even when the water was calm. Low tide was approaching, leaving variable depth beneath the dock, with deeper water alongside the outer piles where tidal flow had eroded sand. The ladder's bottom rung hovered above sand and scattered rock. The dock extended 12 yards over black water, reflecting only faint light from a house inland. In that part of Queensland, saltwater crocodiles regularly move between estuaries, tidal flats, and open coastal margins. Adult males commonly reach 13 to 15 feet and can weigh over 1,000 pounds. They are capable of remaining motionless with only nostrils and eyes exposed, and in turbid water, their backs may sit just below the surface. Attacks at docks and boat ramps are documented during entry or exit, when a person's movement slows and the lower body remains submerged. Earlier that evening, a warning sign at the beach access point advised of crocodile presence in the area. Ren had noted slide marks along a mangrove bank earlier in the week. Neither man treated the dock as risk-free, but familiarity reduced urgency. The tide was falling, which they considered favorable along open shoreline. What was less obvious was that falling tide concentrates fish and constricts space beneath structures, bringing predators into tighter water. They surfaced within 6 yards of the ladder. Ren reached it first and climbed out, placing fins and mask on the boards. Idris remained in the water briefly, unhooking a console and turning toward the rungs. He clipped his short tether from his harness to the ladder rail before ascending. He stepped onto the bottom rung and paused to remove his left fin. That pause left him vertical, lower body suspended. Ren later told police he heard a heavy strike against the ladder and a surge of water. Idris's body snapped sideways. The crocodile's jaws closed around his left upper thigh. Teeth punched through neoprene and into muscle. The force lifted him from the rung. In water deep enough for rotational leverage beside the scoured pocket. The crocodile initiated a rapid axial spin. The death roll twisted his lower body while his upper torso remained tethered. The line went taut. Ren grabbed the tether and braced against the rail. The rope shuddered under load. Idris was pulled below the surface. The water erupted around the ladder. The roll produced deep tearing injuries and likely severed major vessels high in the thigh, based on later examination. Blood spread quickly through the disturbed water. Ren described the tension changing direction as the animal rolled again, then becoming a sustained pull away from the dock. He continued pulling until the load abruptly lessened. When he drew the tether up, it carried Idris's buoyancy harness without his body. The shoulder webbing had failed at stitched junctions under torsional stress. Fragments of neoprene floated near the ladder. Ren dialed emergency services at 9:41 p.m. and reported a crocodile attack. He remained on the jetty and directed responders to the site. Emergency crews dispatched from the nearest station, about 15 miles south, and arrived around 10:14 p.m., roughly 33 minutes after the call. A Marine unit searched the mangrove edge and dock perimeter with spotlights. At first light, searchers found Idris's body about 200 yards north in a narrow mangrove channel. Injuries were consistent with a powerful bite to the upper thigh followed by rotational trauma. The coroner ruled the cause of death exsanguination from traumatic vascular injury sustained in a saltwater crocodile attack. There was no evidence of prolonged feeding. 4 days later, officers captured and euthanized a male saltwater crocodile just over 14 feet long in the same area after it returned near the dock. Size and location were consistent with the attack site, though definitive identification was not possible. His small dive operation shut down quietly. Additional warning signs were installed at nearby access points and along the jetty. One man paused on a ladder above tidal black water and vanished in seconds. Now, under a half moon on Florida's Gulf Coast, a septic tank technician steps into shin-deep flats where a buried southern stingray waits beneath the sand. It was June 28, 2014. The tide had pulled back from Horseshoe Beach, exposing a broad sand flat under a half moon. The Gulf lay shallow and still, the water barely rippling across packed sand and scattered grass beds, with dock lights glowing faintly over a quiet shoreline long after most boats had gone in. Cale Dombrowski was 34, a septic tank technician from Chiefland who worked long days on rural properties and drove between sites in a worn F-250 with a yellow Labrador riding in the truck bed. He was practical with equipment, but impulsive with spending, still making payments on a jet ski he rarely used. He was not a strong swimmer and preferred wading along shorelines rather than venturing into deeper channels. That Saturday had been a last-minute plan with his longtime friend Remy Bastien, a plumber who lived nearby. They packed 2 six-packs, a bottle of bourbon, rods, and a small dome tent, planning to fish the evening tide and sleep near the public boat ramp. By 10 p.m., both men had been drinking steadily for hours. A man cleaning fish at the dock later told deputies he heard them laughing and splashing, but did not consider it unusual. Around 10:20 p.m., Remy suggested they walk out along the flat to look for bait movement. The water was warm, murky, and between mid-shin and just below the knee. Cale went first, barefoot, stepping normally instead of dragging his feet. Neither man performed the stingray shuffle commonly advised along Florida's Gulf Coast. Horseshoe Beach remains shallow for a long distance from shore, with soft sand and occasional patches of mud. Southern stingrays are frequently present during summer months, resting partially buried beneath a thin layer of sediment with only their eyes and spiracles visible. Large adults in this region typically measure 3 to 4 feet across, and their defensive spine usually ranges from about 6 to 10 inches rather than a full foot. The spine is serrated and venom-coated, but its primary danger is mechanical. When stepped on or pinned, a ray reflexively whips its tail upward in a short arc. The fish-cleaning witness reported hearing a sudden shift in tone from laughter to a sharp sound. Cale had taken a long step forward when his right foot pressed down onto the back of a buried ray. The tail snapped upward in a single reflex motion. Based on the wound later documented, the barb entered high on the inner right thigh, several inches below the groin crease, consistent with a forward-stepping posture and a short upward arc. There was no large splash. Cale recoiled and grabbed at his leg. Remy's phone video, later collected by deputies, showed only their lower bodies illuminated by a flashlight beam. Cale took 2 steps toward shore. Within seconds, the water around his legs began to darken. Investigators later noted that the wound's location corresponded to the upper femoral region, where a major artery runs close to the surface before descending deeper into the thigh. The bleeding appeared heavy and continuous, rather than spurting visibly in the dark water. Cale bent forward and pressed his hand against his thigh. He He then lowered into a seated position in approximately 10 inches of water. For roughly 30 seconds, Cale's movement slowed as the flashlight beam drifted unsteadily over the water, then settled on the darkening spread around his legs. Remy stood frozen for a moment before dropping the light into the sand and running toward the boat ramp. A man cleaning fish nearby saw him sprint past, shouting that something had cut Cale. A nearby homeowner called 911 at approximately 10:34 p.m. Emergency crews responded from roughly 20 miles away along rural roads. Deputies arrived first and found Cale on his back in shallow water about 8 yards from shore, unresponsive. The tide had shifted only slightly. Paramedics arrived about 35 minutes after dispatch. He had no pulse and was not breathing. A deep puncture wound was visible high on the inner thigh, with heavy blood loss in the surrounding sand and water. Resuscitation was attempted and later stopped at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death exsanguination due to a penetrating femoral artery injury from a stingray spine. Venom was present but not the primary cause. The injury pattern was consistent with a single defensive tail strike. The next morning, his truck remained in the lot with his dog in the bed. After giving a statement, his friend retrieved it. A brief regional article reported a fatal stingray injury during nighttime wading. The phone video was logged as evidence and not released. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.